week of Advent, the third week of our series of Those Who Dream. We know at this point that those who dream keep awake, one eye seeing the world as it is, and one eye closed to dream the dreams of God, the places where God can enter in to make the world be as it should. We know that those who dream prepare the way, shouting at the edges that God's peace is coming. Even now, in this time of protest and pandemic, God's kingdom on earth is coming. God will put on flesh and move into our neighborhoods when peace, like a river, will flow. Today, in our third week of our worship series, we will look at how those who dream sow joy. One of my colleagues once said that living our faith is not a fishing story, where we get to exaggerate how big the one we reeled in was, highlighting the struggle, the battle between the fish on one end of the hook and the strength of the one holding the rod. Instead, this colleague often reminded us all that living in faith is like a farming story. We put the seeds into the soil, and sometimes we have to wait. Many times we have to wait and wait and wait. And we can do everything right. We can prepare every contingency. But in the end, we have to rely on something beyond ourselves to make that seed of faith grow. So it is with joy. There are times when we have the seeds of joy, of doing everything right, of being alert to the possibilities, preparing the way, and still, we must wait. Joy doesn't always immediately spring forth. That doesn't mean we abandon it. We are called to tend and nurture the dreams that God has woven into us, just as Mary did, just as Mary sang. Will you pray with me this morning? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. In a scene from a virtual Christmas pageant I almost chose for this year, Mary receives the news that she is to bear the Son of God and promptly decides that a visit to her cousin, Elizabeth, is in order. We instantly cut to Elizabeth sitting on a couch, eating ice cream and pickles a bowl balanced on her belly, feet up, relaxing. For she too has had a miraculous birth, a miraculous conception. The doorbell rings and instantly the baby in Elizabeth's aged womb leaps for joy. Elizabeth answers the door, and upon seeing Mary, instantly starts gushing about the good news that is growing in Mary's womb, the blessing so large and so apparent that it is known even to the babe in Elizabeth's womb. I can see the two women, one old, postmenopausal, the other young, barely menstruating, recognizing the beauty and the blessing and the hardship that is before them both. They are bursting with good news, and Mary can't help but sing about it. She can't keep from singing about how God has shown up in her life, choosing her to be the mother of the Messiah. She knows how God has done great things for her. She recognizes with awe that Elizabeth's recognition, as well as the recognition of Elizabeth's unborn child, well, that's just the beginning. She knows she will be blessed. And she knows that a blessing is something a bit more rooted than a parking spot opening up just in front of us. Well, that's a good thing. Or a beautiful family photo, which is another good thing. Or any other moment where everything in life seems to be going well and all seems right in the world. Although there are good things. But Mary's blessing is beyond even that. Mary knows she is blessed even though she doesn't wear fancy clothes or live in a photo spread-worthy home. She knows she is blessed even though some would consider her disgraced, unmarried, and pregnant. She knows she is blessed even with the undoubtedly mixed blessing of being the mother of the Messiah. In a few months, Simeon will remind her at Jesus' presentation in the temple that the small seed now planted in her womb is destined for the falling and rising of many in Israel, and that a sword will pierce Mary's soul as well. It seems to me that bearing a child who will right the wrongs, the injustices of the past, fulfilling the promises of her ancestors, that is the very definition of a mixed blessing. And still, Mary sings. Mary sings of the hungry being filled and the rich being sent away empty. She sings of a dream that the world will be set right side up again. She sings praises for a God who honors her, who decided to use her, Mary, in her body, in her time, to bring forth the promises of Isaiah, promises of spirit, of release, of liberty, of healing. Mary sings of how what God is doing is consistent with how God has saved in the past, as different as that agenda is from human rulers. Mary sings of the God who will save not just souls, but embodied people who are experiencing living hell on earth, as well as welcoming people into the final banquet in heaven. Mary sings of the God who fills people not only with hope, with peace, with the seeds of joy, but also with food, giving a place at the table, giving the lowly a place at the table, a voice in the conversation. She sings of a God who disrupts the world's power structures, dethroning rulers, humbling the mighty. Mary sings, sowing joy, rooted in connection between her and Elizabeth, her and God, her and her ancestors. Mary sings, showing us the joy that comes bubbling up as we surrender to God's vision, to God's moral imagining, to God's dreams of all finding a better way, to raise up, to bring down, to fill those who are empty and empty those who are full of themselves, to make a path straight in the wilderness to God. She sings, and in her joy, she sows seeds that may be reaped in tears, but will also transform the world in all of its possibility. The Magnificat, this song that Mary sings, is full of moral imagination, of dreaming about what the world might look like when God sets the world right side up again. For us, on this side of Jesus' birth, life, death, and resurrection, we are invited to keep dreaming, keep imagining what it might look like for a just world. One where God provides for the poor, where the powerful are stripped of arrogance and taught to love their neighbor. We are invited to keep dreaming, keep singing, to sow seeds of joy that the way the world is now is not the way it should be, or how ultimately it is going to be. So maybe our response, our actions, need to be to sow joy through acceptance and love, in service and in nurturing human beings in, and not in spite of, their bodies, their flesh, particularly the flesh of people that the world says isn't good enough. Because Mary's song, more than anything, reminds us that God works through bodies, through flesh and blood and bone. God works through old bodies like Elizabeth, and young bodies like Mary's, through imperfect bodies and all bodies, men's bodies and women's bodies, bodies that are beautiful and capable and never reflected on magazine covers, bodies that we have been taught to hate and despise and to find fault with. God works through bodies like our own, like Mary's, like Elizabeth's, like John the Baptist's, like Jesus, God's own self. God works to love the world with a love that makes creation whole. Our choice, like Mary's, as if we are willing to risk sowing joy, especially when it is so easy to be joyless in this world. It's pretty easy to be joyless in this world. It's pretty simple. It doesn't take much effort at all. It's easy to put someone down, no problem. We can put ourselves down. I've done it today. We can toss out negative comments towards strangers from the safety of our own computer screens. It's easy to not do anything. So sowing joy, to sow joy, to choose to sow joy, that is hard. Those who garden, those who farm, know the trickiness, the riskiness of planting seeds. Some seeds won't germinate at all. They remain buried in the soil. And when the seeds sprout, some of them must be weeded out so their stronger neighbors can thrive. Then there's the tricky balance of keeping them watered to their satisfaction. Too little, and it's a drought. Too hard of rain or rough winds, and they are pummeled. Or pests can devour them before they have a chance to develop. And sometimes, like in the case of Owen's watermelon earlier this year, we think we are growing, tending to one thing, only to have something completely unexpected bear fruits. What we thought was watermelon turned out to be pumpkins. In the same way, Mary could have easily looked at all the ways the situation could have gone wrong. Miscarriage, vigilante justice, insecurity. She could have leaned into the anger and disbelief, the fear of what could come next. I think she knew the risk. And yet, this Sunday, the third Sunday of Advent, we talk about joy by retelling the story of a teenage mother in crisis. A teenage mother at risk. And the risk and the crisis was there, and so was the joy. So was the hope, the promise that as hard as it is, was, will be, this is a good thing. This is good news. It has been said many times in many ways that joy is resistance, especially in the tough days. The days when we hear about yet another life cut short by COVID, about yet another loved one who tested positive, the days when the fighting starts with the sun and doesn't end until everyone has been sent to their own rooms in anger to sleep it off. On those days, joy is resistance. Joy remains even when everything else crumbles around us, and it is so hard. Joy is resistance that helps us to keep singing in the midst of the fear and pain of the world. Joy is resistance. Joy is hard, and joy can't be taken away. And so, we can choose to continue to dream, using our moral imagination to live into and act out all the ways the world will be better. We hold fast to this promise that one is coming who will put the world right side up again. We may not know when, but we know who. The one who brings the powerful down from their thrones and who lifts up the lowly, filling them with good things. In our lives and in our prayers, may God continue to write the story of the promise of joy in and through you for the hope and healing